In last week's video, I talked about the new immersive panning features in MixBus 10, and I found that MixBus 10 might be the easiest way to get into Dolby Atmos. It provides a quick and dirty approach that does not compromise your original stereo mix and simply allows you to add an Atmos version in case you need one to submit it to your music distribution service. If you have not seen that video, I recommend that you check it out. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. But one thing I did not talk about was how you can best utilize the different master buses in a stereo mixing environment. To show you what I mean, let's have a look at last week's MixBus session. And here we have a stereo bus as well as an immersive bus. These two coexist side by side. And the immersive bus on top of everything also has a binaural output as well as a 7.1.4 output. Now, since I'm working in a stereo mixing environment, the 7.1.4 output isn't routed anywhere. And the binaural output and the stereo output are routed to the same hardware output. And that can become a problem because if I'm unmuting both of them, they are essentially layered on top of each other, and this is not what you want. So you always need to make sure that one of them is muted or your listening environment is completely wrong. And this leaves the question, is there a better way to do the routing in a stereo mixing environment, especially if you are working with headphones? And the answer to that question is yes, there is. And this is what we're going to talk about today, advanced Atmos routing for stereo mixing environments in MixBus 10. So let's get started. What we're going to do today is to add a virtual monitor controller application to our MixBus setup. This monitor controller will allow us to utilize all three outputs, the immersive 7.1.4 output, the immersive binaural output, and the regular stereo output. And in order to best utilize the 7.1.4 output, we are, in addition, going to use the Apple Spatial Audio Monitoring with the AirPods in head tracking mode. This will allow us to hear the 7.1.4 output as if we were working with a 7.1.4 speaker setup. Now, unfortunately, this means that the approach we're going to use today works only on a Mac, as Apple Spatial Audio Monitoring is only accessible through the Apple macOS operating system. And additionally, you will also need an Apple Silicon-based Mac because Intel-based Macs do not have the ability to work with Apple Spatial Audio. For those of you working on Windows-based systems or Intel-based Macs, I will talk about an alternative option for how you can do something very similar on your system towards the end of this video. So this video should be helpful even if you're not working with an Apple Silicon-based Mac. Now, the virtual monitor controller software we are going to use is Ginger Audio's Ground Control Sphere. I did a video about this application specifically a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to leave a link in the description in case you're interested. Now, unfortunately, Ground Control Sphere is a tad expensive, but if you're working in any mixing environment where you want to have the ability to utilize multiple outputs simultaneously, it is definitely worth it. At this point, I should probably mention that this is not a sponsored video. Everything that I'm going to use today I bought with my own money. And with that being said, let's start setting up Ground Control Sphere with the Apple AirPods. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the Apple AirPods, and I'm going to work with AirPods Pro today. You could also use the AirPods Max or any of the Beats headphones that have personalized Apple Spatial Audio. And then I'm going to open up Ground Control Sphere as my virtual monitor controller. So let's open that up here. Here we are. And in Ground Control Sphere, what I can do is I can select different outputs from my digital audio workstation and route them into different hardware outputs. In my particular case, all of these outputs are going to be routed into the Apple AirPods. So how do I set that up? Very, very simply. I have here the input section in Ground Control Sphere. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select different channels coming out of MixBus to be routed into the three different buses, a 7.1.4 bus, a binaural stereo bus, and a regular stereo bus. And the 7.1.4 output is going to be routed into input A. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to simply go into the setup, and I'm going to say I want to select as an input device this Sphere 16 device. This is a device that comes with Ground Control Sphere. And I'm going to select that to be a 7.1.4. And that's really everything I need to do. I can also rename it. So let's just rename that to immersive. Immersive. And I should be able to write immersive 7.1.4. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the other two. I'm going to select a stereo input for input B. This is going to become my binaural input. So once again, I'm going to select the Sphere 16. This is the device that we are going to use in order to route the audio from MixBus into ground control Sphere. I now need a stereo bus, and I'm going to use the outputs 13 and 14. 1 through 12 are, say, the 7.1.4 output, and 13 and 14 are going to be the binaural. So I'm going to select that, and let's call that binaural. And then I'm going to set one additional, and that's going to be the stereo one. And for the stereo, I'm once again going to select the Sphere 16 as my input device. I'm going to select the stereo device, and I'm going to select the last two remaining channels that I have here, 15 and 16. And these are going to become my stereo output. And the only thing that I need to do now is in stereo. And the only thing I need to do is I now need in MixBus to route the 3 different buses correctly into the 16 channels of my output. And that's really everything I need to do. The second thing I need to do in ground control Sphere is I need to set the output to be my Apple AirPods. And the way I'm going to do that is in the output section here, I'm going to set the main output, and the main output is going to be, and what I'm going to use here, and for those of you who have been following my channel, you know that I do that in order to give you guys the same impression that I have with my AirPods. I'm using a special loopback device that simultaneously put outputs to my AirPods and also to the Rodecaster so that you hear exactly what I'm hearing. This is where we have the loopback AirPods device, and I'm going to essentially kind of select the stereo device. Once again, for those of you who have never seen that, this is the loopback device here, and all it's really doing is it's taking in the audio and then sending it on to the Apple AirPods as well as to the Rodecaster so that you guys have the same impression that I have. In your case, you would select the Apple AirPods in this case. Now, one thing I could actually do here, and I have not done that because the loopback system actually works well for me, but I could also use the outputs here in ground control Sphere to have 2 separate outputs, one to my AirPods and one to the Rodecaster. But once again, kind of never change a winning team. The loopback device has worked well for me, so I'm going to use it that way. Now, there's one final thing I need to do, and that is in the 7.1.4 bus, I currently only hear the first 2 channels because my hardware output is only stereo. So what I need to do is I need to add a rendering plugin that renders the 7.1.4 in binaural. And the render plugin that I'm going to use is one that actually works with the personalized head-tracked audio in my AirPods. And this is the iRender plugin that comes with ground control Sphere. So let's do that. Now, the first thing, I need to close that window. I don't need that anymore. And then I'm going to go into the immersive 7.1.4 settings, and I'm going to add a plugin here. And the plugin that I'm going to add is the iRender Spatial plugin. And I'm going to leave it the way it is right now. It has automatically detected that it is a 7.1.4 channel or a 7.1.4 track, and it needs to convert it into binaural, and it defaults to binaural static, which essentially is how you would hear spatial audio on an iPhone without personalized spatial audio or head-track spatial audio enabled. So I'm going to leave it like that for the moment being. And what this will do, it will essentially take the 7.1.4 and convert it into binaural. So at the moment, what I have is I have 3 inputs. I have the 7.1.4 input, I have the binaural input, I have the stereo input, and they're all routed into the output, which are my Apple AirPods. And I can now select which one I want to listen to by simply clicking on that button. And, if you have a hardware controller, you can also map those to a hardware controller so that you can click buttons. And this is actually really convenient. Now, this is everything I needed to set up in ground control Sphere. So the next thing would be to set up everything in MixBus. So let's open up MixBus. Before I continue, a quick reminder, if you have enjoyed this video so far, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions or comments, please either use the comment section below or join us on our Discord server. The invite link is in the description. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by becoming a member either through YouTube or Patreon. There's also a free membership option on Patreon if you just want to lurk around. You can also use one of the affiliate links below or buy some of my In Immersion We Find Presence merch, like this mug, for example. Links are in the description as well. All contributions to this channel are used to purchase the software and hardware I talk about on this channel. And with that being said, let's start up MixBus 10 and complete the Atmos monitoring setup. So let's open up Mixbus, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to recreate the project that we did last week, and I'm not going to talk too much about how exactly we did everything. If you want to know how we did that exactly, I invite you to watch last week's video. I think it was a really good video. But here I'm simply going to create a new session to set up everything fresh, and I'm going to do that here. Now, the first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that all the settings are correct. So we need to have 512 samples. We need to have 48 kilohertz because that is a requirement for Dolby Atmos. And then we need to select our output device to be the Sphere 16 device. This is the one that essentially ground control Sphere is listening to. So we need to select that one, and then let's start it up. And that should be everything that we needed to do on the settings side of things. And what I'm going to do is, as last week, I'm going to add 3 stereo tracks, and these 3 stereo tracks are going to hold a couple of samples, and I have these samples here. These are once again samples that are used in my game audio tutorials. They have treated me well. I never get any copyright issues with those, so I'm going to use them here. Doesn't really make any difference what exactly we're going to use. And the last one here. And then with that, we should already hear something. So let me just play the audio and see if we get audio. So let's loop that. And indeed we do. We get audio. Now, if you remember last week, we said that setting up Dolby Atmos is actually super simple. All we really need to do is we need to go into the session menu and then simply enable immersive panning. And as soon as I enable immersive panning, I should essentially turn everything, or everything turns into a Dolby Atmos session. And that is about as much as I need to do, which I once again think is really, really simple to do. So let me go back into the mix view. And in the mix view, we now have the master bus, the stereo master bus, the immersive master bus, and we have the 7.1.4 master bus as well. Now, I'm currently hearing everything through binaural, and what I now need to do is I simply need to set up the outputs for Mixbus in order to match them with what Ground Control Sphere is expecting on the 3 different inputs in Ground Control Sphere. But before I do that, let me just kind of stop the audio here. Now, as I said in the beginning, these 2 buses, the stereo bus and the immersive bus, work pretty much independently. So if I work the way I have set it up right now, I always need to make sure that I have at least one of them muted, because otherwise they once again are on top of each other and I'm getting the wrong impression. But with working with Ground Control Sphere, I will actually be able to have all of them work at the same time. And most importantly, I will also be able to have the 7.1.4 output active, because at the moment that doesn't really go anywhere, because I once again only have a stereo listening environment. So let's set that up. Now, before I do the actual setup, let me do 2 things. The first thing, let me maximize the Mixbus window, because that is a very busy user interface. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply pan the 3 tracks a little. And I'm once again going to do the same thing that we did last week. So we had like the bass and the keys here somewhere on the side, and we had the synth here in the front, and I put that a little bit into the center so that we get some information on the center channel, and then we had the pad here in the back, just to make sure that we get information on all 12 channels. And then all I really need to do is I need to set the outputs, and I can set these outputs by going into the routing grid here. So I'm first going to go into the routing grid for the immersive master bus. I'm going to click here and going to open up the routing grid, and in the routing grid, I'm going to select the hardware outputs, and here I can essentially select what exactly is routed where. Now I'm going to disable these 2 because they are not where I actually want them to be. What I want is I want the first 12 go into the first 12 channels of the output. These are the 7.1.4, or this is the 7.1.4 signal. And then we routed the binaural to 13 and 14. So we kind of make this diagonal here. And that should take care of the 7.1.4 output and the binaural output. And the final thing that I need to do is the stereo output also go into the, actually I don't need to go into the routing grid. I simply select outputs 15 and 16. And that should now kind of move everything into the correct channel. So once again, the 7.1.4 goes into the first 12. The binaural goes into 13 and 14, and the stereo goes into 15 and 16. And those should now be correctly routed into ground control sphere, because that's the way we set up ground control sphere. So let's have a listen if that's actually correct. So let's play the audio again. And now that I've routed everything correctly, I can actually unmute all three outputs. So I can also unmute the stereo output, and it's not going to change the audio at all, because I'm currently listening actually to the 7.1.4 signal downmixed to binaural. We will see that in a second. But if I unmute it now, essentially it's still the same audio, and that is because I now have them separated in three different outputs. Now how this looks like, the easiest way to kind of check that out is simply go into ground control sphere. And in ground control sphere we now see that the immersive 7.1.4 is enabled. There is the iRender plugin on there. So what is currently happening is that it's taking in the 7.1.4 signal. It's going to convert it into binaural according to the Apple binaural rendering algorithm. And it's then going to send that out into the main. And in the main, once again, it's going to be routed into my AirPods and also into the Rodecaster that I have here, so that you guys hear the same thing that I'm hearing. And I can now simply select which one I want to listen to. Do I want to listen to the 7.1.4 immersively? Do I want to listen to the binaural rendering from within MixBus? Or do I want to listen to the stereo out? And I can simply switch between them and listen to whatever I want to listen to. Now there's one additional thing that I can do, is that I can essentially enable head tracking, and the way to do that is very, very simple. All I really need to do is I need to enable head tracking in the iRender plugin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the settings here again and open up the plugin here. Here see so that the audio coming in this particular plugin, and all I really need to do is I need to switch the settings from binaural static to binaural head tracked. And as soon as I do that, I should now have everything head tracked. So if I'm moving my head, you will actually hear that as a panning, because once again, you're hearing exactly the same thing that I'm hearing. So let me shut up for a second and let me move my head and see if the head tracking actually works. And you might hear that the pad is in the back and the synth is in the front. Essentially means that if I'm moving my head, the synth will be, for you essentially, it feels like a panning of the synth. And the experience that I have is exactly the same that I would have in a 7.1.4 listening environment. And once again, I can now switch, and I don't need that open, so let's just close that. I can now switch between the head tracked binaural, between the binaural that is coming out of MixBus and the regular stereo, and I can switch back and forth however I want to do that, and it is very, very seamless, and once again, very easy to do. Now, as you can see, this is very easy to set up and provides you with a mixing environment where you have the most important versions of your mix available at the push of a button. This includes Apple Spatial Audio with AirPods, which is arguably the most common way people listen to spatial audio. However, there are a few disadvantages. Ground control sphere is fairly expensive, so unless getting immersive mixes to sound consistent with stereo mixes is extremely important to you, it might not be worth the cost. And additionally, if you want to utilize Apple Spatial Audio monitoring with head tracking, you need to use the AirPods Pro, AirPods Max, or one of the Beats headphones, none of which are really good studio headphones. I should note that if you do not want to use AirPods, or if you are on an Intel-based Mac, you can still do everything I did today with the single exception of head tracking. That one is only available on Apple Silicon Macs with AirPods. But what about Windows? Now, obviously, Apple Spatial Audio Monitoring is not available on Windows, and neither is the Ground Control Sphere Virtual Monitor software. But you can set up something fairly equivalent. What you have to do is use Reaper instead of Ground Control Sphere and use Reaper's reroute to route the 16 channels from Mixbus into Reaper. You can then set up 3 monitoring channels in the same way we set it up in Ground Control Sphere, and instead of the iRender Spatial plugin, you would have to use a binaural rendering plugin with head tracking capabilities, which is available on Windows. My recommendation for that would be APL Virtuoso in connection with the SubAware head tracker. This will function pretty much the same way. The only disadvantage would be that the head-tracked binaural audio would not be exactly the same as the Apple Spatial head-tracked audio, since Apple uses a different rendering algorithm, but it would still be fully immersive. Now, this is fairly straightforward to set up. If you've been following my channel, which you definitely should, I have already talked about all the individual steps you would need to take in previous videos. But if you want me to do a Mixbus-specific video that walks you through the entire process in detail, let me know in the comments. I can definitely create a little tutorial on how to do that. But this is everything I wanted to say today. Thanks again for watching my videos. I truly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below or join us on our Discord server for a chat. And with that being said, see you all at the next video.